The other big story, which I suspect is going to affect the news agenda for a while to come, was the launch yesterday of the new paramilitary wing of the Conservative Party. We've got a bit of video from it, and here it is.
We've been swimming against the tide when we're talking about Conservative values. Whether it's what's going on in our schools and the fact that wokeism seems to be on the curriculum, and in our universities and in our corporate sector, there seems to be confusion about basic biological issues like what is a woman.
Good God, she's back. She's back and she's still talking rubbish. And I can almost see there once or twice she was kind of pausing for laughs, like in the pork market special. Then she was stopping herself and trying to say the next bit. Now, Dave, you were there. You went to this launch yesterday of the pop cons, as they're being called, the popular Conservatives. Tell us what happened. What was it like?
Well, this was the launch of yet another faction of the Conservative Party. There, we heard various speakers. Jacob Rees-Mogg was up. I mean, he gave quite the rant about various things, including the Supreme Court and the Rwanda decision. We heard a lot of politicians blaming effectively civil servants, quangos, people like this, saying that although we've got the will, we're being scuppered. I mean, which is an incredible flex after 14 years of power. We heard Lee Anderson saying that only when he's outdoor knocking with people, only the odd weirdo brings up green issues and net zero. And
he
obviously,
claimed that coal was sustainable, didn't he? At one point,
he did. Yeah, I mean, it was quite the science lesson for us. It was.
Yeah, because coal comes from trees, so therefore it's an environmental fuel. God.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's. Yeah,
if you're watching, Lee, coal came from when the entire planet was covered by the rainforest or ocean and everything. There was therefore huge amounts of trees and ferns and animal life that managed to sink to the bottom, then got subsumed into the Earth's crust, subjected to massive heat and pressure, and could be found again 100 million years later to release the power of the sun and the warmth in a fire, right? But that in itself then polluted the planet. And unfortunately, between then and now, in the 100 million years since the coal was formed, we no longer have the kind of space or the kind of resources that would be making enough coal every week, for more coal. It's gone, mate. Gone. Not sustainable. Sorry, Dave, carry on.
No, you're absolutely right. So we heard from him and his thoughts on net zero, which is obviously something that we're seeing more resistance from on the Tory right. We saw a Tory rising star and election candidate called Myri Fraser. She aimed her gun straight at Rishi Sunak and said that the smoking ban that he's planning on bringing in, this rule whereby current 14-year-olds will never legally be able to buy tobacco. She branded it ludicrous. This is something that Liz Truss has also said she intends to vote against. She's going to be an interesting character. She's the candidate in Epsom and Ewell, and she's sort of previously described Donald Trump as incredibly refreshing. And I think
she might drink a bleach.
Yeah, I mean, she'll certainly fit into that wing of the party. So we saw her, and then obviously we saw the speech from Liz Truss. I think we're going to see her for years and years and years trying to explain to us how the 49 days of chaos, the increased mortgage fee, all the issues that we're seeing now as a result of what she did in that mini budget were everyone's fault but her own. She's made it very clear that she thinks that the orthodoxy within the civil service, within the financial institutions, held her back, and that actually she had great ideas. It was everyone else's fault that that none of this worked.
Yeah, Rachel says her saying that supporting LGBT people is a bad thing. It's absolutely disgusting. We had a comment, I think it was from someone called Lynn, about she's got a cheek. She was useless. Lynette, there you go. Wow, she's got a cheek. Aaron says, Liz Truss, the poor man's Maggie Thatcher. I don't think she's even Maggie. I think Maggie would just be speechless at what Liz was doing.
Well, I think the awful thing about this, I mean, we know from the polling, certainly the figures that came out earlier this week, we know that she's got a poll rating of -54. That compares against Rishi Sunak, who's on -27. She's incredibly unpopular with the public, who will always hold what happened against her. But she still retains a base. I mean, when she came up on the stage and when she walked into the room, there were huge cheers in the room, as there were at Tory Party conference when she gave us.
Were there people who were paid to cheer or were there for some other reason? I mean, it's kind of astonishing. She, as you say, she's the least popular politician in living memory. She blame what happened in her 49 days on the city or economics or other things, but you really can't blame trans people for what happened to people's mortgages. She's just...
No, and I think this is the really dangerous thing. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the election. It's the Tory right know that this culture war nonsense is going to play well with the party membership. Not with the wider public, I don't think, but we certainly saw during the leadership race with Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss that you could rely at some point on her saying, and I know a woman is a woman, and then pausing for the applause, which she would get from, the sort of harder right members of the Tory party themselves, who are quite a long way right of the wider population.
Yeah, exactly. This is the problem, isn't it? The Conservatives has. Rachel says Maggie did at least believe in climate change, although she was still awful. The fact that Liz, she's far less popular than Rishi, who everybody hates apart from his wife and his helicopter pilot. She hasn't gone quietly, has she, since this sort of disastrous 49-day reign of terror that she had last year before last?
Yeah, 2022.
Before last, 2022. Oh God, it seems like only last week. In fact, she's popped up again and again. So she's been visiting the neocons in Washington, for example. She's now leading this political faction in a party that's already got about 1,000 different factions. Is this, do you think, a genuine new thrust for the Tories, which is going to define the party for its shape and its policies sort of into and beyond the next general election? Or is this just like a completely deluded Liz Truss and cronies who think if they call themselves popular Conservatives that it will somehow make it so?
Well, I think she knows. I mean, she's won a leadership election. I mean, in terms of running for the leadership again, or certainly, we all know she's a spent force. I think were the Tories to decide that they were going to give her another shot, I think the public would not be forgiving at all.
I think the public would just move.
I find it absolutely incredible. I mean, she's very much like, me personally, if I make a mistake, I'm absolutely mortified by it. And you feel, sort of struggle to make eye contact with people and so forth. I mean, you feel absolutely ashamed. And the absolute brazenness of Liz Truss, who's literally added hundreds of pounds onto people's mortgages every single month with her absolute incompetence. She nearly crashed, sort of a big part of the pensions market. She, the damage she caused was absolutely incredible. And now she's back brazen as you get and, not taking any sort of responsibility for it. But I think it's interesting. I mean, there were a lot of high profile Tories, not just among those speaking, but sort of in the audience as well. We saw Dame Priti Patel there, who will inevitably, I think, be involved when there's a leadership contest come the next election. And I think that's going to be incredibly ugly. I mean, I think we're going to see then just how divided the Tory party is. And bear in mind, to put in context, the launch of the Popular Conservatives, so-called, are joining an already very crowded field of groups on the right of the Tory party. I mean, we heard a lot about the five families, as they were dubbed, during the Rwanda votes. So there's already sort of 5 different groups of hard right Tories who want to see lower taxes. They want to see a harder policy on immigration. They're very much leaning into the culture war issues that, I think we're going to hear more and more about, and hopefully Labour will take a more moral stand against.
Yeah.
There
are some people in those groups who are in more than one group. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg was European Research Group as well as now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's certainly a lot of overlap.
Some of them are very split within their own heads, aren't they?
Well, I think the strange thing about this is I was speaking to quite a lot of people while I was there, because the thing I was really curious about is where does this group fit in and why is there a need for it? Because for a Tory MP on the right of the party who wants a group of like-minded MPs to join against, particularly those that are getting increasingly hostile to Rishi Sunak, they're already very well served for groups that they could potentially join up to. Like you say, there's the European Research Group, the ERG. There's Conservative Growth Group, there's Northern Research Group, there's New Conservatives who have only sprung up in the last year. Certainly, though, there were people from those groups. Only Lee Anderson's been very involved in the past in the New Conservatives. So there is, like you say, a lot of overlap between the two. But where this popular conservatism fits into that, strange new ecosystem on the right of the party remains to be seen, and how influential they'll be in terms of, sort of who they're going to draw in, whether they're going to cause problems down the line for, sort of when it comes to drawing up a manifesto.
That's it, because they're going to be seeking to influence policy and so on, aren't they? Now, Rachel says, not just a couple of £100 on her mortgage, £1,000 on my mortgage, thanks to Liz. I know someone who's had a couple of thousand put on their mortgage every month. It was pretty horrific, people to have to deal with. Now, there was another spectre at yesterday's fairly ugly feast, which was Nigel Farage, right?
Yes.
The former UKIP leader, now pretend journalist, who turned up, didn't ask a single question, of course, and was arguably more popular than Liz because he was getting stopped for selfies every 5 seconds, apparently. Dave, what was he doing there? Because he left the Tories 30 years ago.
Well, I mean, he said in advance he was there in his capacity as a journalist for a right-wing news channel. He's very much, he's very much visible. I mean, he knows that a lot of this is being pitched for him. The Tories know that if they can bring him into the fold, there's rewards to be had from doing it. He made the point afterwards. He said that he liked a lot of what he'd heard from the stage, but he also knows that that Rishi Sunak, who will ultimately be responsible for drawing up the next manifesto, isn't going to provide this. So, I mean, I think Nigel Farage poses a very big problem for the Tories, because they know that if they'll be desperate to try and keep him on side. I mean, the best case scenario for Sunak and co would be to draw him back into the Tory fold, because they know that if he were to sort of get more visible, stand for a seat potentially. I know he said he's not going to do it because he wants to be more involved in the US elections. But if he were to stand for a seat, sort of take a more visible role leading Reform UK, for example, that's a real big split on the Tory voters, especially knowing that a lot of the Tory membership is a long way right of the general public.
Yeah.
And knowing that even within there'd be a big risk of defections as well. Certainly some of the factions that we saw yesterday and that we see in groups like the New Conservatives. I'd imagine if they come forward and some of the policies on tax and immigration don't make it into the manifesto, I think there's a very strong chance that you'll have a lot of people that will sort of re-emerge very quickly as Reform UK candidates.
Yeah, perhaps some of those who've stood down and are going to as Tories. Andy says the Thunderbird puppets had better controlled hands than the Truss puppet, and a puppet she is. Now, quickly, before we move on to good news, I want to just have a quick chat about this point that you made there about the Conservative Party and its base. So it's got a strong part of its roots, its activists, its party members, its MPs who are quite on the right of the party, who are very right in terms of they want tax cuts, they want business to have far more less regulation, I should say, far more freedoms, less regulation than perhaps most of the population do. And if Rishi is going to get re-elected or save as many of those MPs' jobs as possible if they lose the election, then he has to appeal to the broadest possible base, right? He cannot appeal just to this hard right kind of nugget of hardliners. He has to go broader, but he can't keep them happy if he goes broader. So he's got this fundamental, real big problem, isn't he? That he's got to try and appeal through a more extreme right-wing media that we've seen emerge in the last few years, a more extreme base that's come out, it's perhaps been radicalised a bit by Brexit and other issues, and yet a general population that is perhaps certainly more centrist and maybe even a little bit more left-wing in the wake of the pandemic. So how's he going to square that? How can he possibly?
Well, I think with a great deal of difficulty. I mean, the Tories, whoever was in charge at this stage, is going to be a victim of their own success in that in 2019, they saw so many places turn from Labour to Tories, by very narrow majorities. But in many ways, it was a snap election called to try and finally break this Brexit deadlock. To sort of people being told that Boris Johnson had what he described as an oven-ready Brexit deal, albeit subsequently turned out to have a few issues with it.
Yeah, it wasn't a chicken and it was nowhere near the oven. But
no,
yeah.
I say this very generously to him, because there's a whole other avenue we could go down at some length. But yeah, so we had a lot of people that were probably voting Tory for the first time, weren't necessarily likely to be long-term diehard Tory voters, but we saw this area down the Red Wall, places like Ashfield, where Lee Anderson won, where in normal circumstances wouldn't have previously in previous elections been a target Tory seat. Now, obviously, the pressure, now they've got these seats, is to try and retain them.
Yeah.
And, certainly there's one Tory MP, James Daly, who has a majority of 105. He was announced as Tory Deputy Party Chairman this week. Sort of very popular among the Tory right. But, places like this, it would be, in the normal run of things, would be hard to hold on to seats like this. Having now changed leader 2 times, got Rishi Sunak, who's sort of very unpopular with the public anyway for various reasons, and the general malaise where you see there's this sense now that everything's falling apart. We kind of feel like we're in the sort of 15th series of a Netflix series where sort of all the characters have kind of run their course. They're bringing back characters from the first series. Sort of everything just feels like it's kind of last days of Rome, everything's falling apart type thing. I think there's a general sense of that through the population. So in terms of having a wider appeal, I mean, this is going to be very difficult for Rishi Sunak, because if he hasn't got a uniting issue like Brexit and trying to break that deadlock to try and sort of rally the country around. In the last election, Boris Johnson chose to call it for that reason, and he was able to package it and say, look, we can finally get Parliament moving again by doing this. I think, sort of were in any situation where Boris Johnson's still Prime Minister and things had run normally in the past few years, I think he would find it difficult, albeit he'd probably have better control over the parliamentary party.
Yeah,
and
I think maybe it's going to get to the point where Rishi Sunak might go full Walter White, in the season finale, and just sort of end up burning a barn in the middle of nowhere, laughing his head off crazily.
I mean, I kind of think as well. I mean, who's he going to listen to? Because I think they've been a victim of the fact that they had this leadership race, and the way the Tory party is structured, it's the membership that choose who the leader is. And we saw that summer of them choosing the candidate that the wider public didn't necessarily want to. In terms of the parliamentary group, were very strongly in favour of Rishi Sunak. The party loved the promises that Liz Truss was making, albeit, sort of being told by, pretty much, by economists, by Rishi Sunak himself, how unfeasible what she was planning was. It transpired that this was true, but there's always the risk, as long as this system's in place, that sort of the next time that there's a leadership race is going to go through exactly the same process with people who are very easily seduced by promises of tax cuts, sort of immigration. They know which buttons to press, and trying to square that with effectively leading a party is going to be very difficult for Rishi Sunak, let alone appealing to the public. It's when things just feel like they're going wrong on so many fronts.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I'm not Rishi Sunak yet again.
Well, yeah, exactly.
On Twitter, David says about dentists, their contracts were changed around 30 years ago because they were ripping off parents by doing fillings on kids whether they needed them or not. Don't know about that, but that's what David thinks. What goes around comes around, though the present rules are just as bad, but the other way around. We've also got Maximilian talking about Liz Truss. Why isn't this windbag behind bars? Well, she hasn't committed a crime, although she's definitely not very popular. Jonathan says on Twitter, she cannot take responsibility for her actions because she just doesn't get it. She's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Years ago, she'd have been in my class sitting at the round table with the trusty teaching assistant. Oh, dear. You go and sit on the round table with the teaching assistant. Thank you. That's a good one.